Good morning and good afternoon. Before we start with our today's webinar called Step by Step, the Higg FEM Verification Trail Section 7, Waste, I would like to say a few words. We are experiencing unprecedented times. The COVID-19 pandemic has an impact on the health of the people we care about, the businesses we rely on, the stability of the global economy, and our daily lives. In light of these unique and ever-increasing challenges that we all face at this time, we at Leadership and Sustainability would like to pledge our support. Because after all, our work has never been so tested nor been more important. We want to thank all of you for your continued commitment. In this spirit, it is great to have so many participants joining this webinar. We from Leadership and Sustainability are looking forward to spending the next hour with you. This is the sixth in a series of webinars where we will take you into depth of the different sections of the Higg FEM, the Facility Environmental Module. My name is Laura Brüggen and I'm an Associate Sustainability Manager at Leadership and Sustainability. I have the pleasure to assist Karen Ekberg and Ramya Kandior in today's webinar and will take over the introduction to the verification trail. Karen, if you please begin to introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you, Lara. Yes, my name is Karen Ekberg, and I'm the CEO and the founder of Leadership and Sustainability. I'm really pleased to be here with you today. Ramya?
Hi everyone, this is Ramya here. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I'm based out of India. By qualification, I'm a textile technologist with over 17 years of experience in the textile, safety, and consulting domains. I'm a qualified Higg FEM trainer as well as a lead auditor for ISO 14001 and OSHA's 18001 management systems. Thank you. Laura?
Thank you, Ramya. Today we will introduce you to the SAC Higg FEM Facility Environmental Module, continuing with Section 7, Waste. After our presentation, we will have time for your questions, and finally, we will make you an offer and present our team to you. So let me introduce you to the verification trail and its purpose. The purpose of the verification trail is to give you a better and deeper understanding of the Higg FEM. We will take you through the Higg FEM section by section and make you acquainted with all requirements. Before we continue on our trail, I would like to give you an overview of the verification process. We have identified 7 simple process steps. At first, you complete your self-assessment. This is also where our webinar series strives to support you in. Here you can use the SAC supporting documents such as the How to Higg guide. As a second step, you will engage a verifier and provide information on aspects such as your type of factory and number of employees, if you're using chemicals in the production, and also which chemical level you have reached during your assessment, because this will also determine if a chemical specialist verifier is needed. Moreover, it is helpful to the verifier to know which levels you have reached in the other sections, and last but not least, information whether a wastewater treatment plant is placed on site and the address of your factory for traveling arrangement is very helpful. As a third step, you will make your self-assessment available to the verifier. Here it is important that all your documents can be downloaded properly. Then the verifier will review your self-assessment and documents and also informs about gaps and issues beforehand. To prepare you for the verification, the verifier will send an agenda ahead of the on-site visit. On the day of the verification, we recommend you to be well prepared and familiarized with your assessment and especially your documents. As a final step, a closing meeting will be conducted with a reporting, and after a final call, you can post your results on higg.org. The SAC has issued a protocol for on-site verification, which gives you information about the verification process. It is also possible to do an off-site verification. But please observe that if you intend to verify your self-assessment, then you need to plan for it early and also buy the so-called VFEM. You can only buy the VFEM until October 31st. For all of you who are doing your self-assessment or preparing to get verified, here is some very important advice. Appoint a person who is responsible to complete the Higg FEM self-assessment on an annual basis. Read the How to Higg guidance and the verification preparation guidance for facilities. respond to the questions comprehensively, and document all responses. The SAC requires documentation proof for nearly all questions. The SAC guidance on how to verify is very strict regarding documentation. So be clear when setting targets and baselines. And be aware of the time needed. The ultimate goal is to improve every year. This may sound trivial, but believe me, most facilities can improve here, and these are easy scores. Okay, let's get back to our trail. This is the overview of all the sections that are included in the FEM module. Today, we move on to the 7th section, waste. And now, I would like to hand over to Ramya Kandior. Ramya, please go ahead.
Thank you, Laura. Every year, the manufacturing of apparel, footwear, and textiles produces millions of tons of waste that have the potential to pollute the environment. If not managed appropriately, these wastes can contaminate the land, water, and air in the surrounding communities. Prioritizing waste prevention and proper management can significantly reduce a company's impact on the environment, which is our objective, of course. Higg FEM defines waste as any material or substance that is discarded from a factory site, which can pollute and contaminate the environment and surrounding communities. Fundamentally, you can categorize waste into hazardous and non-hazardous waste. Non-hazardous production waste is generated from manufacturing processes directly, for example, cloth, leather, plastic, paper, or packaging waste. A part of the domestic waste also falls under non-hazardous waste. This includes, for example, food waste, which is typically generated from facility canteens and kitchens, and sanitary waste, which is the household waste from office and dormitory areas, for example, toilet paper, yard or garden waste, glass, and food packaging wastes, etc. And non-hazardous waste. Hazardous waste is waste that could cause harm to the public health and the environment. Examples are chemical waste and waste from industrial wastewater treatment. However, the classification into hazardous and non-hazardous waste may differ from one country legislation to another, defining which type of wastes are categorized as hazardous differently. A facility should at minimum follow the legal waste requirements. If legal requirements are not available, it's recommended to select more stringent industry guidelines. Can we move to the next slide? Yeah. As in all other sections, the questions here are categorized into 3 levels. We will now guide you through the waste section levels. For each level, there are allocated subtopics with corresponding questions. You can see the levels in the structure here. We have 7 questions in level 1 covering inventory, storage, handling, and training. 7 questions in level 2 on setting baselines, waste reduction targets, improvement plan, demonstrated reduction in quantity and improved disposal methods. And finally in level 3, 2 questions on disposal validation and waste diversion. Let's now walk through the waste section question by question. So let's move on to question 1. Developing a waste inventory is the first step in understanding the environmental impacts of the waste your facility generates. Creating a good waste inventory allows a facility to ensure that all legal requirements are met with regards to the generation, handling, and disposal of hazardous and non-hazardous waste. It helps to better understand where the waste is generated. It helps to track waste generation quantities and document how wastes are being disposed of. It helps to identify opportunities for improvement. Both question 1 and 2 are related to waste streams. Before you manage, you need to measure what you have. Question 1 asks you to list all non-hazardous waste streams you have and to report what quantities you have of each waste stream. All the listed items in the slide are classified as non-hazardous waste. Question 2 continues with the same question, but now for hazardous waste. It is expected that you list all the hazardous waste items generated from production, packaging, and domestic waste streams from your facility. All the items mentioned in the slide would come under the category of hazardous waste. You may have domestic waste, which is also hazardous, for example, batteries, fluorescent light bulbs, and many other categories. It would be essential to capture these waste streams from their source and include in the inventory. Measurement and tracking of waste quantities is one of the key foundations of a waste management program. Typically, waste quantities are obtained from on-site measurements or disposal invoices or waste manifests. It would be essential to have in place a monthly monitoring program that measures the quantity of the waste. It's important that all on-site measurement equipment is maintained and calibrated in accordance with the manufacturer's specification. In order to determine the quantities of waste generated, you may use bills and invoices, or you may use weighing scales. Question number 3 goes on to ask you, does your facility segregate all waste streams into non-hazardous and hazardous waste and store them separately? All waste streams must be segregated and stored. Segregating hazardous and non-hazardous waste can prevent unwanted reactions between the waste streams, reduce pollution and harm to the environment and people, and finally help reduce costs because mixing waste can increase the volume of the waste classified as hazardous, which is of course more expensive to dispose of, and thus prevent any unwanted exposure for personnel. The first step is to make sure that legal requirements related to waste are met. This should include all the steps involved, namely generation, collection, segregation, storage, transportation, treatment, and finally disposal. You should also provide sufficient work instructions or standard operating procedures and signs for handling and segregating non-hazardous waste. This can be in the form of training and awareness campaigns, or this could even be in the form of posters at the work site, work instructions, or even simply as signs directing where to put which waste. Next, we go on to question number 4, which asks you, does your facility have well-marked designated hazardous waste storage areas? Hazardous waste poses a greater risk to the environment and human health than non-hazardous waste and thus requires stricter management process. It's important to have a designated hazardous waste storage area to eliminate its risk to workers and the environment. Management should understand the dangers of hazardous waste and the importance of preventing contamination. Key employees should be trained on how to prevent contamination in hazard storage areas. Let's go on to the next question here, which is question number 5, which asks you, does your facility have well-marked designated non-hazardous waste storage areas? Non-hazardous wastes can pose contamination risks, for example, pollution, waste being dispersed by the wind, food waste, leachate, etc. And finally, this causes risks to workers by means of fire or sharp objects. Waste shouldn't be kept for too long and in too much quantity. Any site where waste is concentrated and stored even for a short period of time may be a potential point source of ground and groundwater contamination. Question 3, 4, and 5 is regarding waste handling. In general, both the hazardous and non-hazardous waste should be stored separately and should be clearly marked as either hazardous or non-hazardous. It should be protected from weather, that is, it should be well sheltered to ensure that the waste is protected from elements of nature. Ventilated, that is, it should have well designated and well maintained ventilation systems which remove corrosive, flammable, and toxic vapors, fumes, mists, or airborne dusts from the workplace and reduce their hazards. It should be protected from unauthorized employees, that is, you should ensure there is a restricted entry board with the list of permissible personnel who are allowed into such areas. It should have explosion proof lighting. It should be devoid of water drains from where water could spill. And finally, it should have clearly labeled contents of what is kept where. Next, we go on to question 6, which asks you, does your facility forbid open burning and dumping on site? A written policy document from your facility is the best evidence to support an affirmative reply to this question. Any unauthorized burning and dumping of waste on the premise of your facility should be forbidden, as air emissions will not be controlled, collected, and treated. If such a practice occurs, then all the waste gases should be released through a chimney, stack, or vent so the emissions can be controlled and a filter can be applied to capture pollution in such cases. Next, we go on to question 7, which asks you, does your site provide training to all employees whose work involves hazardous waste handling, such as maintenance and custodial staff? The training should ideally cover proper handling. It should cover storage and disposal techniques and procedures. It should cover specific operational procedures for waste minimization and the use of personal protective equipment, that is, the distribution and the management of personal protective equipment. In addition to training, a factory should provide sufficient working instructions and signs for handling, segregating, and transporting non-hazardous waste. This completes the set of questions for level 1. And here I'll hand over to Karen to continue with the questions at level 2 and 3. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Ramya. And so now we are arriving at level 2 and question 8. Has your facility set a baseline for solid waste? As we have seen also in the energy and the water use section, the baselining is a really important step when you start your target setting and improvement process. The intent of this question is to give you that starting point by defining the baseline. You will see online all the different waste categories that you have listed previously, and then you should select all sources of waste for which your facility has set a baseline. And you should indicate the source of the waste. Is the baseline absolute or normalized? And we will talk a bit more about that very soon. What is the baseline quantity? The unit of measure. You should also enter the baseline year and describe how your baseline was calculated, and also reply to the question, was your baseline verified? And now let's have a look at the normalization calculation. So we have included one example here. Let's say that in 2019 you produced 1 million pieces of garments, and that you had, for the textile waste category, you had 50,000 kilo that you generated in 2019. In this case, if you want to calculate the normalized baseline, you will take 50,000 of the kilogram textile waste and divide it by the 1 million pieces that you produced. And this will give you the result of 0.05 kilogram textile waste per piece, or 50 gram textile waste per piece. So this is the very simple calculation that you also did in the energy and in the water use section. And of course, the crux, the difficulty here lies in the decision on how to normalize. So if you have a very constant production that you produce always the same type of garments, for example, let's say you always produce t-shirts, then the normalization will work well, and you will probably be able to compare your normalized values year by year. However, if your production is changing, let's say you have t-shirts, you have sweaters, you produce underwear, and obviously, depending on which type of product you produce, you will have very different amount of textile waste per piece of product you produce. And that may be difficult. So if the range stays constant year by year so that you always have the same number of t-shirts, the same number of sweaters, the same number of underwear, then it shouldn't be a problem. But when you start, for example, producing much more underwear than t-shirts, and increase the number of products you produce for one category year by year, then it might be difficult to use the normalized value. But it's still usually much better than to just work with an absolute baseline, because the absolute baseline will not be able to mirror any production increases or decreases. All right, so let's move on to the next question. Did you set a baseline for waste disposal methods for your facility's overall waste? So now we are not talking about the quantities of waste in the different categories that you generate. Now we are talking about the actual disposal methods. So how much of your waste goes to landfill, how much of your waste goes to incineration with energy recovery, how much of your waste is recycled, etc. So this is now the task here, to define the baseline for the actual disposal method. So in order to calculate this, you use exactly the same calculation method as we shown before if you want to have a normalized baseline value here. And you should then also indicate which methods. So you should indicate the disposal method, the baseline quantity, the baseline year, how was the baseline calculated, and was the baseline verified. So similarly to the previous question. And now, moving on from your baselining to setting targets, the next question asks you to set formal targets to reduce waste quantity. So the questions are, what is the target change for waste generated from this source? What is the target year? Describe the measures planned to achieve this target. And here, similarly to what you have to do in the energy and in the water use section, you should, if you want to receive full score, you need to include at least 80% of your total waste generation. So if you do that and set a reduction target for at least 8% of your total waste generation, then you will receive full score here. If you set a target that cover 50 to 79% of your total waste generation, then you will receive partial score. So that's quite a strict requirement from SAC, and it's the same requirement for all the three sections: energy, water use, and waste. And another thing also, when you indicate the target in the tool online, if you are reducing, then you should include a minus. So for example, you will reduce 5%. Then you insert the number -5 into the online tool. And similarly, did you set a target for improving waste disposal methods for your facility's overall waste? So you see that in the waste section, it is a bit more complex. It's not only about reducing the quantities you have, but also in improving your waste disposal methods. So if you respond yes here, you should also respond to the following questions: the waste disposal method, what is your target change for this method of disposal, what is the target year, and also describing the measures planned to achieve this target. And I want to show you one very simple example here of a target to improve the waste disposal method. So let's say that you are sending a lot of waste to landfill, and now you decide to send textile, plastic, and leather waste to a vendor that processes the waste in an incinerator plant with energy recovery. This is assessed to be a better method than the landfill to to handle the waste. So your expected reduction of waste sent to landfill would be 10%, because the textile, plastic, and leather scrap represents 10% of the total waste you have that you are sending to landfill today. And in this case, you can do this at no cost, let's say, because the waste treatment costs are equal. And finally, you decide that your timeline to start doing this is May, to complete this is May 2020. So this is just a simple example of an improvement plan for this case. And now the next question is, and this goes into what we already talked about, the implementation plan. Does your facility have an implementation plan to reduce waste quantity or improve type of treatment? So here, this implementation plan actually covers both quantity reductions and improvement in the type of treatment. And let's have a look here, which steps to include in an implementation plan. So you should have an identification of the waste improvement opportunities. You should have evaluated waste management alternatives. You should also prioritize the improvement items and set progressive timelines. You should approve funds for chosen solution. For the chosen solution, it's not every case that it will be for free that you can change. You should, of course, also assign a team and staff to make sure that you track and monitor the process. And you should also conduct a regular review to check progress of improvement projects. So following now, and you have probably already realized that the waste section is quite long. The chemical section is the longest section, and that's our next and last webinar. But the waste section is also quite long, so we continue here now with a follow-up with a question 13. Has your facility reduced waste quantity or improved type of treatment compared with the established baseline? And there you have also the opportunity again to list the sources that are improved, the percentage improvement achieved in the last calendar year, and also a description of the plan and strategies that you used to achieve those improvements. So perhaps in your implementation plan, you had several actions in order to reach this, and perhaps some of them were successful and some of them were not. And here, in this question, you should respond and you should explain what made it successful. Why was it that I was able to reduce the waste quantity or improve the type of treatment? And here now is the question about improving waste disposal methods for the overall waste compared with the baseline. So you should select the baseline year. You should describe what was the percentage change that you achieved, and you should again describe the strategies used to achieve this improvement. And now we are already at level 3, and at level 3 we have 2 questions. And one is actually a very important one. It's the question is, does your facility validate the final disposal and treatment of all hazardous wastes? And what we are asking for here is really that you check on your providers, on your service providers that take care of your hazardous waste streams. So if you have, for example, a service provider that is using incineration with energy recovery for your hazardous waste or for one of your hazardous waste streams, you should actually go and audit this facility. You should go there, check the records, of course, but also have a tour around the site. Similarly to what the external verifiers are doing with your facility when they come and verify your facility. And you need to do this for all hazardous waste streams, and the validation should take place on site with those contractors every 3 years. So every 3rd year you need to do this. Very important. And it's really also in terms of being liable for what happens with the waste even after it has left your own facility, it is a very important step. And then the final question, question 16, has your factory diverted at least 90% of all discarded materials, all waste, from landfills, incinerators, and the environment? So this question here, you actually need to have removed at least 90% of all your waste volumes, all the waste that you generate from landfills, incinerators, and the environment. And here with incinerators are meant incinerators that are not having an energy recovery. So incinerators with an energy recovery is okay. But incinerators that do not have an energy recovery or landfills are actually not okay. So you should have basically less than 10% going into landfills or incinerators without an energy recovery. So that's a very, and also for many countries where the infrastructure is not built out to offer other opportunities than landfills or very simple incinerators. Of course, for this, for those countries and regions, this is a very, very challenging question. So you may not, depending on the local infrastructure that you have in your area, it may not be possible for you to reach this goal here and respond yes here. All right, so that was actually the last. No, sorry, that was wrong. We have one more question, and this is about upcycling and recycling into better products. So the question is, does your facility upcycle some of its waste or insert its waste into a circular economy system? An example of upcycling could be if you could insert the scrap textile waste you have into another production system, for example, the production of rugs. And there are lots of innovative projects around. They may still be in a pilot scale, but a lot of focus when it comes to investments into research in the textile sector today in this environmental and sustainability area actually goes into how can we increase the circularity of our products, how can we make sure that we keep the products in a circular system and thereby also upcycle the waste that we have. And with that, we have come to the last question in this section. And now we can open up for questions. So let's have a look and see if we have any questions here. Yes, I have one question here. Most of the waste in Bangladesh is handed over to waste contractor, but which method we can say it is? Well, here in this case, you should ask the contractor which treatment your different waste categories go into with him. So he should be able to say how he handled the waste. And otherwise, it's not possible for you to say that. So you really need that information from him or her. And then we have one question, a very technical question. Please share effect of waste to energy treatment method of natural leather. So do you mean incineration with energy recovery of natural leather? You may need to, perhaps you could explain the question a bit better and I will take care of that later. Okay, and then we have someone who asked us to review the steps for question 12 again. Let's have a look if we can go back to question number 12. Yes, so here you can see the steps to include in an implementation plan. Identification of the waste improvement opportunities, And you also should, before you actually decide about the implementation, you should have evaluated different waste management alternatives. You should prioritize the improvement items, approve funds, of course, the budget for the chosen solution, implement the solution, and assign a team. So those are quite general. Steps you need to take. And of course, you should also conduct a regular review. All right. Okay. Sorry, here we are. And let's see, I think we had a few more questions. Let me have a look. Okay. Here someone is asking about the training, verifying and performance approving. And we can take up that with you. It's very difficult to give you a price just like that. It depends very much on the size and complexity of the facility, but it also depends on how deep you would like to go in the training, for example. So we will be happy to communicate with you offline about that. And then we have one question. Are those requirements of waste management in line with the requirements of an ISO 14001 certification in garment production facilities? Yes, to a large extent. The Higg FEM in general is very much oriented towards an ISO 14001 management system. So it has adopted the overall approach of a management system where you have a policy, you define a strategy, you set goals, and then you improve and monitor for improvements. So yes, you can say it's very much aligned with ISO 14001, but the waste section is also here in Higg FEM is also more specific. Because ISO 14001 is an environmental management system standard, it doesn't say specifically what you need to do. And here in Higg FEM, it's more specific. Of course, ISO 14001 asks you also to reduce your waste quantities, but it does it in a general way. So you don't always need to have a goal to reduce your waste quantities. You may have over 1 year, you may have an energy and a water target, for example, and next year you may want to focus on waste. So ISO 14001 doesn't require all facilities to always have targets in each and every environmental area, but actually Higg FEM here asks you to do that. You can decide not to set targets, but then of course you will lose a lot of points in the assessment. So I hope that responded to your question, and otherwise just follow up with a follow-up question. And then the next question is, how can I validate waste disposal method? This is also a very good question, and how you do that is you make sure that you understand what the process is at that waste disposal facility. So you will ask them to inform you about the processes that they have. You will check their documents, that they have all the permits and the operating license that they need to have. And then you should ask them to be able to go on site and also visit their facility. And when you do that visit, you should work in a very similar way that we would do as a verifier. So you ask them about their management system, which processes they have in place, how do they take care of chemicals, for example, how do they safeguard the health of their workers, what does it look like in the facility, is it in a good shape, is it orderly? So very similar questions as we are asking in the Higg FEM. And yeah, so that's you basically conduct an audit at that facility. Yeah. And then of course, if it is a facility that has air emissions, you would be asking them about the legal limits for the air emissions, what the results are that they have when they are measuring their air emissions. Their own waste, they will probably have a residual waste afterwards, what is happening with that. If it is a landfill, is it safeguarded when it comes to, for example, pollution of soil and groundwater? Is it, does it have a good foundation so that nothing can leak out from that landfill? What is happening, for example, with the landfill gases that may be generated? And again, how are the workers protected? So it depends, of course. The specific questions you need to ask are, of course, depending on which type of waste treatment facility we are talking about here. Okay, and then a clarification regarding the waste to energy treatment of natural leather. So this would be that you would have natural leather and you would incinerate it with an energy recovery. And usually, if you have an incinerator, you always have a requirement regarding which temperature you need to achieve in the oven when you burn the materials. And so usually for natural leather, you would have a complete incineration of the leather. It may be if the leather has been treated, but you say natural leather here, so I guess it hasn't been treated. If it has been treated, if there are a lot of chemicals that has been used in the leather, then it may be a hazardous waste. But for natural leather, it should be a domestic waste, basically qualification. Yeah. I hope that it was helpful, but you need to know exactly the composition basically of the leather in order to know how to incinerate it in a good way. Okay, great. Yes, and then another question here, and that is for some waste like burnt oil, expired chemicals, which is the best disposal method except landfilling? Yes, actually, to landfill hazardous waste is not a good option in my experience. There are better methods, and the best methods is to have an incineration process with energy recovery. But if you burn hazardous waste, you need to do that at a temperature that is at least 1,000 degrees Celsius or even 1,100, 1,200 degrees Celsius in order to make sure that there is a complete incineration. And then, of course, there needs to be a very comprehensive flue gas treatment as well. And so that is really very, very important. And there may be other like that, which is in a way a sort of incineration, but there may be a co-generation, a co-treatment in the cement and industry. So that is also one option that is practiced in some countries, also actually here in Europe as well. Okay. And then what if I'm recycling more than 98% of waste? How will I improve my method? That's a really good question. So you you are already doing very, very well, I would say, if you are able to recycle 98% of your waste. So the very last question, the question 17, you have question 16 about removing at least 90% of the waste from landfills. You can then give a full yes there. And in order to improve further, well, you need to have a look at the last 2% you have and see what is possible to do that there. But I would say you are really doing very well already. And then the question about choosing absolute or normalized baseline. So when do we choose absolute for a baseline? Yes, for manufacturing facilities, most of the time it is better to use normalized values, because you may have 1 year, you may be using 80% of your total capacity. another year you may be using 100% of your total capacity. And obviously you will produce the corresponding number of products. So if you produce, when you produce 100% at 100% of your capacity, if you produce 1 million garments, when you produce 80%, you will produce 800,000 garments. And of course, although offices, etc., and lighting may be the same, but for the waste, you will have quite a corresponding value of waste dependent on the actual production that you have. So when you produce 800,000 garments, you will have much less waste than when you produce 1 million garments. And if you then choose an absolute baseline, you will have, if you 1 year produce 800,000 and then the next year 1 million, you will have an increase of your waste with perhaps 20-25%, or let's say between 15 and 25%. So then you are increasing your waste generation, but you were also producing more products. So if you would have used a normalized baseline, you would have had the same value, let's say, unless you had implemented any measures. So yeah, that was a long explanation. I hope that helps. And then how many verified facilities are there today? So in 2019, the number of verified facilities, I'm not sure I remember. It's above 1,000 facilities. Ramya or Laura, do you remember the exact number of verified facilities last year in 2019? Perhaps not. We may need to come back to you with that question. So we will take a note of that question and give you that information. We have that statistics available. All right. It seems that that may have been the last question. We still have some time. Yeah, we have one more question here. For landfill pits, is it required to have any lining? Yes, it is. For all landfills, for domestic waste, but also for hazardous waste, you actually need to have a lining, because even domestic waste will leak, will have a leachate when it rains on top of that landfill. Even if it has a good coverage, there will be water also coming out of the landfill, a leachate, which will also remove some substances from the landfill. So it may be contaminated. So it actually needs to have a really, really good lining. And I can tell you, many years ago, actually 30 years ago, I worked in a business where we were cleaning up toxic landfills, and it was a huge, huge task. We built wastewater treatment plants to take care of that very, very toxic leachate. And so it's very, very important to have very good practices when it comes to landfilling, and at best not to use landfills for toxic waste. But I am aware that there are many countries where this is still practice. All right. So with that, we should continue. We have some more information for you before we close. And let me just pull up that next slide for you. So Laura, I think I should hand over to you here, shouldn't I?
Yes, thank you, Karen. Maybe just in correspondence to your question about the verified facilities, the total verifications completed were indeed 2008. So,
okay,
so
great.
now we have it. I'm sorry for confusion.
Not a problem. Okay, so 2008 verified
Yes.
facilities in 2019. Great.
Exactly. Sorry about that. Okay, great. Good. So to come back to our presentation then, I would like to recommend some of our previous webinars, among others from our verification trail and more. Here you can see an overview, and yeah, you're happily invited to either rewatch our recording and have a look at our presentation.
Thank you, Lara. Thank you. Okay, and so I would like also to give you an overview now about the Higg FEM and the SLCP verification. So we are now not only an approved verifying and training body for Higg FEM, but we are also an approved verifying and training body for SLCP, which within the SAC community is called FSLM. So we can offer the verification and training to you. And the verification, it's really about determining the accuracy of responses reported in the facility self-assessment. So it is an assurance of the self-assessment that you have done. And it's usually the verification is taking place on site. There are cases where facilities would like to have it done off-site as well, but in most cases it is done on-site. And the benefit of the on-site is we can also verify the chemical sections levels 2 and 3. We are not allowed to do that off-site, but also on-site, of course, it's much easier to get a good understanding of the factory and the practices in the factory. So that's the verification. And then and as I need to correct myself, the SLCP verification is always taking place on site. So the off-site alternative is just not available there. And then the training is really about providing support during the self-assessment process or in between in preparation for the self-assessment process. And there we are really focusing on the facility's needs and performance, discovering areas of improvement, which doesn't mean that, for example, during the verification, of course, during the verification, you will receive feedback as well. And there may be things that we can even support you in improving during the verification. And then I will hand back again to Laura.
Thank you, Karen. So here you can see an overview of all the countries where we offer Higg FEM training and verification. And please do not hesitate to contact us even if your country is not listed here, although this list is quite comprehensive. We might be able to support you anyway or connect you to one of our partners. And here I will hand back to Karen.
Thank you. All right. Yeah, so we would like to offer, of course, to you also our training and verification, both for FEM and for FSLM or SLCP. And you can actually book a time to speak to me via our booking page. You just click on this link when you receive the presentation, then within 1 or 2 days. And there you can select the corresponding then that you would like to set up an appointment with me to discuss, or you can also contact me for global purposes, or in Turkey you can contact Aladdin or Kerr. And I also wanted to mention, we spoke about deadlines. So if you are doing your self-assessment now, the deadline to post your self-assessment has been extended to June 30th. So instead of April 30th, now the deadline is June 30th. But by then you should have posted your self-assessment. And if you are going to do a verification, plan it quite early, as Laura already mentioned. And please be aware, you can only buy the VFEM module until October 31st. After that, no chance. So October 31st is the deadline to buy the VFEM. You can still have the verification taking place until the end of the year. And so I would really like to invite you to do training and verification with us. And we have been thinking also about the current situation. It is a tremendous stress test for consumers and businesses of all sizes today in the midst of the corona crisis. However, in a landscape that is shifting on a daily basis, a vision of an industry that reduces our environmental impact and increases social justice cannot be put on hold. And that's why we at Leadership and Sustainability decided to not let innovation stop. In these economically also and health-wise uncertain times, we want to support you with promising and cost-effective services so that through our joint efforts we can take action on our vision of the future of the textile industry. And here you can see an overview of the webinar topics that we offer to you. With those webinars, you will be able to comprehensively train your company on sustainability, discover strategic areas of improvement, and understand the status quo of your materiality. If you are interested in participating in one or more of those webinars as a company, then please reach out to me as your point of contact. We would be happy to provide you with a corresponding proposal and discuss our options of collaboration. And you can actually also reach Laura. So please take contact with Laura if you're interested in those webinar trainings that we will be delivering basically from next week onwards. And here we have come to our final slides, and I would like to present our team to you. So 3 of us you have already met in this webinar. And yes, we are a strong team, a growing team. And with that, I would like to thank you so much for today. And I would like to also ask you to respond to the survey that will be available immediately after we close this webinar. We are really happy if you could send us your feedback. It's always valuable to get that feedback. And especially during this difficult time, our industry and the world need us to stand together, united in the challenges we all face. Much can be achieved with courage, generosity, and perseverance. And with this in mind, we wish you all the necessary confidence and trust and strength and power that together we can build a more sustainable future by taking extra care of ourselves, our families, and communities today. And thank you for joining us, and goodbye, everyone.